unambiguously black people accomplish anything, you have to assume the level of intelligence to be probably 5 times as great as it would have taken for a non-black person to achieve the same thing because of the barriers that they've had to go through to get there. So that's that one. And then we go on to these persons. But this is a person whose name is Alexander Twilight. He was born September 23rd, 1795, and he died in 1857. He was an American, this is what Wiki says about him. He was an American educator, minister, and politician. He is said to be the first, they say African American, I'm just going to say black, the first black man known to have earned a bachelor's degree from an American college or university, graduating from Middlebury College in 1823. And Middlebury College to this day is ranked very highly in terms of exclusivity and its high level of academic ranking, its prestige. And a bachelor's degree in college during that time, as Kofi pointed out on his program, was really something akin to what a PhD is thought of today. It was a big, big deal. Okay, should it be any surprise that he was the first? Because he wasn't really black. Okay, the next one is going to be Charles Drew, who many, many people have heard of. That's what he looks like. You know, does that look like a black man to you? He doesn't to me. And Charles Drew was born in 1904, certainly when the one-drop rule was in full effect. And he was an American surgeon and medical researcher. He is said by Wiki to have researched in the field of blood transfusions, developing improved techniques for blood storage, and applied his expert knowledge to developing large-scale blood banks early in World War II. This allowed medics to save thousands of lives of Allied forces. And then it says, as the most prominent black man, they say African American in the field, Drew protested against the practice of racial segregation in the donation of blood, as it lacked scientific foundation, and resigned his position with the American Red Cross, which maintained the policy until 1950. So I would say thank you and have great appreciation for him being an ally of actual black people, but was he actually one? No, he was one formally. I will say that he would not have been given those opportunities, nor would he have been allowed probably to escape terrorism, meaning threats on his life or his family or his residence, had he actually been a black man. None of those things. Next. This is a woman who came very late to prominence. She is one of the actual women from Hidden Figures. And her name is Katherine Coleman Goebel Johnson. She was born in 1918, again, a time in which the official one-drop rule was supposedly in full effect. And she is supposed to be the first black, not first, but she was one of the first, a black mathematician. She was critical to the success of the first and subsequent U.S. manned space flights. He's going to speak to some gender politics as regards to racism at NASA. But yeah, that's her. And then there's a second picture of her when she's older, and you can get another view of her that's not black and white, although she's much older. You know, again, to me, clearly not a black woman. This, believe it or not, is also someone who was considered black. Okay, his name was Lemuel Hayes, and he was born in 1753. He died in 1833. So he was born at a time before the United States Constitution was even penned, before there was the Revolutionary War that separated England from the United States. He was the first black man in the United States to be ordained as a minister, which was a big deal back then, because remember, the whole separation of church and state was a big deal, but clergymen who were ordained had, the official stamp of approval was sort of like getting the official stamp of approval from a very close to from a university. These were supposedly learned people who were spreading a history and a gospel of something that was supposedly very important, and supposedly expert in interpreting a very important document that they held at that time, which was the 1611 King James Bible. He became an anti-slavery activist. Again, I would put this in the same basket as, Mexicans or Hispanics today who are not black, but who rail against white supremacy. What they are doing is, you don't want to be second class on that non-black team, but you're clearly in that non-black team. If you were not on that non-black team, you would not have been given that opportunity. And so, as if we're talking about European people, or if we're talking about people who clearly look to be in between, they are neither black nor white, but they are certainly not black. Any of those people can do things that are in strong allyship with black people's interests. He was an ally. I would say the same thing of John Brown. I would say the same thing of radical Republican, all of the radical Republicans at the time of the Civil War and just after, in that period of Reconstruction. I've forgotten all of their names, escape me at this moment, but you can look up radical Republicans. But probably the most famous was Thaddeus Stevens, and he is responsible for sponsoring the 13th Amendment, which had supposedly abolished involuntary servitude. And that's an issue, abolishing involuntary servitude and slavery. I am now questioning whether or not that was put in there, because they were in fact two different things. But that is not the subject of this broadcast. But yeah, he was responsible for that. He was responsible for the 1866 Civil Rights Package, which was the only civil rights package until 100 years later in 1964 when that was passed. And he insisted on being buried in a grave that was remote and that included black Americans, because he wanted his principles to be upheld even in death. Now, that type of thing you have to say is strong allyship, but just as John Kennedy and Thaddeus Stevens, we applaud their commendable behavior, but we don't in any way say that they are deserving of an appellation or designation of being black persons. Okay, they wouldn't have been able to get where they were had they been at that time. The same can be said, however, for one-droppers or 3 or 4 droppers or 5 droppers, these hybrids. If they're not black phenotypically, they're not black. Now, even if they railed against some of the things that were happening to unambiguously black people and the slight indignities, and they are slight compared to what unambiguously black people went through, and the slight indignities that they had to endure, they are doing so in a commendable fashion, but that does not make them black. And their descendants who are unambiguously white, to the degree that they are, certainly are not black, and so they don't meet that first requirement of being a black person. Simply identifying yourself as black for 10 years is not enough. There are any number of people who will do that. Rock Newman, look that up. At this point, Rachel Dolezal has been doing it so long that she might qualify, and she might be able to actually find one of her ancestors out of the 256 in 1865 who were enslaved, or just go back one more generation and double that to 512, or one more generation and go back, and that's 1024. Find one document. So right now, that's what's on the table, as I understand it, what I've covered, what I've been able to follow from William Darity is if you can document one ancestor who was a slavery, and if you yourself have been claiming to be black for 10 years, then you would qualify. Now, that's a problem. That's a problem now, although the numbers are smaller, but it's a greater peril going forward, because of course that incentivizes non-black people marrying into and procreating with black people, and then you end up in the same situation as all of these Native American tribes who looked very dark-skinned with Asiatic features, who are now really white people. And there still are these dark-skinned people who have Asiatic features, who are descendants of the original people when they first got their land grants and what have you, but they're drinking themselves to death on the reservation. And this is the situation we will find ourselves in 2 generations, 3 generations at most, if we don't take this phenotype standard seriously. And that takes courage, because all of just about all of us have family. Some of it is first degree family. Some of it is our mothers, our fathers, our sisters, our brothers, certainly our cousins. We have friends. It takes courage to say, I love you, but you're not black. It's not the norm. But people who are willing to stand up for what is correct are very rare, because there's always a cost to that. There's a cost to your popularity. There's a cost to your career. There's a cost to your good feelings and relations with friends and sometimes family. To find a person of integrity, and we're not talking about people who are perfect in every way. We're not talking about people you can't pull out a skeleton here or there. But we're talking about overall people who stand up for what is right, even at great personal sacrifice. Those people are very, very rare. But if we don't stand up and say, no, what happened to the Native Americans is not going to happen to us, we absolutely require a phenotype measurement, a line that you have to meet in order to even move forward to see whether or not you are a descendant of slavery. It's not surprising to me that there are very few people who have the character and integrity to stick with that. This is Patrick Francis Healey. He was known to be a Jesuit priest and educator, and he was the president of Georgetown University from 1874 to 1882, and he was known for expanding that school following the American Civil War. And there's even a hall called Healey Hall that was named after him. And he identified with his Irish heritage, but when it became known that he had some black ancestry, there were some people who designated him as black, but it did not affect, his achievements. He was the first supposedly black person to earn a PhD, so you can imagine. So of course he looks like that.